Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor, Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly, all you need to be healthy is just eat meat, and that's what you should do. But if you're hiking or road tripping or stuck at work and you want something nutritious that is just meat, fat, and possibly salt if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. I like this product not only because it is pure meat, but also because I really want the carnivore market to thrive as well. The more we support meat only products, the more people will make meat only products, and this will bring this into the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to check out, then take a look and use my discount code HTC to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right. Thanks, guys.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the How to Carnivore podcast and YouTube series. We are again joined by Dr. Anthony Chaffee, the Plant-Free MD. Anthony, good to have you on.
Hey, man. Good to see you.
Likewise. And today we've got a special guest, Tom McDonald, who is an AFL player. He's currently in his 13th season in the AFL and is also a proponent of a low-carb, keto, carnivore-ish diet, which we're going to find out more about. So welcome, Tom.
Hey, Simon, mate, good to be on. Good to talk to you both.
Good to have you here. So, Tom, what got you down the nutrition rabbit hole, and how did you discover low carb?
Look, I just like rabbit holes in general, so
yeah,
it wasn't
I can
hard
tell, mate.
to sort of.
I follow you on Twitter.
But yeah, I don't know who actually started it, but I do remember we were talking before about the low carb down under sort of presentations that were on in Melbourne 7 or 8 years ago, and our team doctor was a speaker there. At that time, he was sort of talking about low carb and how he was helping it for his like GP patients. So he was part-time at the footy club, part-time GP, and he was working with like severely obese patients and talking about how he was seeing really good results with low carb keto sort of diets. And he himself had done that. I think he said he got up to 140 kilos at one stage and he was back down to like 100. And so I just sort of got interested in it and thought I'd give it a go. I think we also had I might have told you this story before, Simon. We got in the South African speaker. What's his name again?
Noakes.
Tim Noakes. Yes,
Oh,
Tim
nice.
Noakes.
Yeah.
He was actually in Australia at the time for some reason and came and gave a presentation to the whole team. And so I just found it really interesting and gave it a go for, I reckon, about 6 months. It was through the off-season, pre-season period. Usually guys don't want to try stuff in the middle of the season, and fair enough, because it can be a huge change to do big training wholesale changes or nutrition changes in the middle of the season. So I think I waited to the off season and had a go at it. Saw some, and I was really, really on the high fat, moderate protein, really low carb, and had some really good results in terms of like body fat. My distance running, my endurance running was really, really good. But as we got back to training as a team and doing contact work and more gym work and more explosive stuff, I started to struggle a little bit. And that's where I probably dropped off it. I still probably took the principles from there, but started to go back a little bit to what I was doing before with some higher carb days leading into our big training sessions or game days. So I probably had 3 or 4 years of being in a bit of an in-between phase until then. Yeah, 4 years later, I went into a bit of carnivore research. I don't even know who I came across to start with, but started thinking, well, what if I could fix some of the problems I had by going a bit more carnivore than keto? And that's how I got to that phase, which was a few years ago. And now I'm still probably, I'd be a very high protein eater. I'm not as crazily strict on the carbs, especially around our big training sessions and big games. But still would consider myself a well above normal protein intake for an athlete. So that's sort of a quick rundown. We can go into some more detail around games and how I sort of played with it, but that was sort of where I got to.
Nice. And so at this point, you said you're still doing some carbs like before big training and games and things like that?
Yeah. So
you eat otherwise.
We probably, the season split up into 3 phases. Like pre-season, we will have training sessions on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday that are essentially what a full match is for us. So it's 12 to 14 Ks of running with a fair bit of sprint in there, a lot of contact. And then we would have a full 1 hour lower body power lifting session in the afternoons of those days. So like huge calorie days. And then the Tuesday, Thursdays, we'll have upper body weights with usually some swimming or bike conditioning. And then Saturday mornings would be hill sprints in the morning with a Sunday off. So pre-season's just a brutal training phase. And that's where I would try and have at least some carbs either the night before those. Like I do it a Sunday, Tuesday, and a Thursday night. usually some rice or something like that with steak or whatever I'd be normally having. Or if I didn't have it the night before, I'd have some sort of carb in the morning. Even if I just had a couple of bits of toast, that would probably help me for those days. But in season, we go back to playing a game on the weekend and a moderate training session 3 days before the game, and the other days are all very recovery lifts, maybe one heavy lift during the week, with the others being sort of more accessory. And you only really need to get ready for one day of the week that's a huge energy outlay, which is a game day, say a Saturday. And so I tend to go lower carb through the week, and then I usually make my own fried rice on like a Friday afternoon and have that through to the game. And then that's my sort of big carbs going into the game. But it's not what we used to be, where I was saying before off air that it used to be pancakes, soft drink, hot chips, anything you could possibly get your hands on was an excuse to carb load the day before. I sort of go back to still have a fair bit of protein in it. Like I'd have maybe steak or bacon in my fried rice and plenty of butter and fat in it, but I would have carbs before the game. And that's sort of where I've landed. That's been a bit easier to maintain. But also help me keep body weight in check and stay a bit more, level during the week.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's just a huge benefit anyway. It's just, upping the meat, upping the fat, not being scared of the fat like a lot of people are, worried about that for health reasons, and eating, cleaner carbs, not eating a bunch of processed garbage and things like that. So, I mean, I think even that's such a huge step in the right direction. Obviously, you're seeing, good results, or you wouldn't be doing it. You guys are so, well in tune with your bodies and your performance and things like that, that like, obviously you get a little bit of sand in the watch gears, and, things start to come unraveled. So, yeah.
I did for probably 6 months to 9 months in 2021 of like extremely hard carnivore, barely any cheap meals, maybe like once a month. If we were going out for a beer, I might have a drink and we'd have a Palmer, and I'd be like, fuck it, I'm having this night off. But I was pretty strict, like 95% of the time. And I got super lean for what I'd ever been and did feel awesome. Like everything felt great. The only part that I couldn't quite do was I started to cramp on game days.
Interesting.
And I tried lots of different things, like the salt, all the different electrolyte sort of stuff. And I just couldn't quite get that last bit of the game out without having the cramping. Look, I don't know if you got suggestions and if I was to do it again, what I could do, but I found unless I had the carbs the night before, I was getting to the third quarter and you'd probably run 10 to 11 Ks, and I'd be stressing if I was going to make it to the end of the game. And I was like, as much as I like this concept, if I couldn't quite make it work for my job, I was like, I'm going to go back. But that was the one part I couldn't quite do it. Other than obviously it's mentally it's a big challenge to be as strict as that is for your whole life, let alone just for a footy season. But that was the one part I did find difficult, was getting through to the very end of games.
Okay. But otherwise you felt really good.
Otherwise, everything else was amazing.
Awesome. So, how much water were you drinking?
Look, we wouldn't have measured that sort of stuff. I think I was still reasonable. I don't know if I would add salt to everything. So I think I was getting enough salt. I might have been water.
Yeah. The only reason I ask is because a lot of people, when they start having those cramping issues, the first thing they think about is electrolytes. So they start adding electrolytes. And then if they keep having cramping issues, sometimes they'll add more electrolytes and more salt. And what that does is actually increases your demand for water. And now you're trying to excrete more to get rid of the excess salt. And that can actually make you cramp, because dehydration can certainly make you cramp as well. And so, if you try the electrolytes and that doesn't work, then it's probably more water related, and you should just ramp up the amount of water that you drink. And that often settles things down for people, is really, really ramping up the water. But like I said, the more electrolytes you drink and, putting salt in the water and things like that, that can actually increase your demand for water as well.
How many liters a day? Are you saying like 3 to 4 liters a day, or even more than that?
Oh, minimum. Yeah. Especially for like a big guy like you, and like playing high level sports and doing that sort of activity. Yeah. At least, I mean, when I was, when I was playing, I mean, I felt best like when I was drinking like 7 to 8 liters a day.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. No, I definitely wouldn't have been doing that.
Well, just play with it though. I think definitely more than 4 liters a day for sure. And then like tamp back on the salt and the added salt, just salt to taste. That should be more than enough. And, are you drinking coffee, you taking caffeine, things like that?
Yeah, I drink coffee normally. When I was doing that, I would quite often do like a bulletproof coffee in the morning when I was doing carnivore. So like if I didn't want to eat bacon and eggs on those mornings or whatever I was doing, I would do, the bulletproof style coffee on those days. But I'd always be a 1 to 2 coffees a day sort of guy.
Yeah. So coffee can strip your body from magnesium, and magnesium is known, when you get low magnesium, it's known to give cramps. And but also caffeine is a diuretic, so you end up losing water as well. So it's a sort of perfect storm for cramps, is like low magnesium and dehydration. So if you're gonna take drink coffee, then like certainly I would take like a magnesium supplement specifically, something that's high bioavailability that will absorb really well, and not at the same time as the coffee, because it can stop absorption as well if you take it at the same time, and then just really jack up the amount of water you're drinking.
Yep. Or even caffeine pills on the sort of morning before the game. If you still got the caffeine addiction and you want to feel alert.
Well, that's all we would try to do going into a game. I'd sort of try and have less coffee the 2 to 3 days before a game, and then we would have a no-dose before the match instead.
Yeah, nice.
But either that or you just have the coffee on the way to the game. It sort of depends. We play a lot more night games now, which sucks because, if you're having a coffee at 5 o'clock at night, you go on and play at 7:40, you finish up at midnight and you're already stressed and adrenaline. Like it's a bad combination for sleep, but it sort of is what it is. When we were no good earlier in my career, we used to play all afternoon games, whereas most of our games are like primetime TV games now at 7:50 at night.
Yeah.
It's not good for sleep.
Yeah, I guess it's a good problem to have, but
it's different.
I mean, Tom, there's obviously a little bit of fear, and it's based on experience for you to sort of do those harder sessions without having any carbs on board. Curious to hear Dr. Chaffee's thoughts, because the way that we've sort of spoken about it before is that you can only hold so much energy in your liver in the form of glycogen. Whereas the energy storage tank that we've all got on our bodies in terms of body fat is not endless, but it can last for months. Even on a lean guy like you, Tom, it'd still be a month's worth of energy probably. Dr. Chaffee, do you want to kind of expand on that?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, just from the sound of it, when you were on a carnivore diet, just the meat and water, you were feeling great. It was just the cramping that was an issue, as opposed to like the energy levels and the contact. Am I right up to say that?
Yes, yeah. So when it was keto based, I had more issues with actual power and force production.
Right.
When I went to carnivore, that sort of went away, which was interesting in itself. Like carnivore, I could go back to doing the gym and I was still lifting the same in the gym, but keto I couldn't. So that was an interesting distinction to make. But then still was just on carnivore, still having issues only on the maximal days. Like we were running 15 Ks in a match sort of thing. Was I having issues with cramps?
Yeah. So, when you're doing keto, keto can mean a lot of different things, because it's just the absence of carbohydrates, right? And you have to replace that with something. Generally, it's meat and fat as well. But a lot of people say like, oh, well, I have to eat a lot of veggies and greens and non-carbohydrate ridden plants to get all the nutrients and things like that. So you start eating a lot more of those things. So you can have
to distinguish in my example, I'd probably just go between either high protein versus high fat. When I say keto, I was just a higher fat version of keto. I wasn't really having many veggies anyway. I would have had some, but I've never been a big plant eater anyway.
Yeah.
So that's sort of how I distinguish it. Sorry.
Were you having any carbohydrates, or just low carbohydrates, like below 20 or 50 or something like that? Because people do that as well. It's like maybe just like below 50 or below 20 grams of protein or carbs a day, I should say.
I'd say like below 50, below 20 on a lot of days, below 50 on most. And then, like I was saying, like once a month, we go for a drink or whatever. And those nights you probably just wouldn't care. But 95% of the time, under 50 grams.
Yeah. Okay. And then on carnivore, was it just meat at that point?
No, probably similar, like under 20 grams here and there. And a cheat day once a month.
Yeah. So with different things, there's different things in plants that can trip you up. One of those things are different lectins that can actually bind to insulin receptors even more tightly than insulin can. So some of these things will bind 5 times more tightly than insulin. When insulin's up or it's active or hitting those insulin receptors, it can actually block the energy mobilization from your fat. And so you end up actually being in a worse off position, because you're not eating carbohydrates. So you should be able to mobilize fat, because the lectins is actually not letting you. So it's like you have a lot of insulin, but you don't have carbs coming in. So you sort of gas out. and that can be a problem for people, if they're eating these different sorts of lectins, because that can screw with that as well. Which is why a lot of people, when they go from keto to carnivore, they actually have a lot better results. They lose even more weight, and their exercise potential and endurance goes up as well. That's some of the work from Professor Noakes, was that they actually did like randomized controlled trials with different athletes, and put them on the treadmill, and some were like keto adapted, and that can take some time too. It can take 2-3 weeks sometimes before people get fully keto adapted, fat adapted. For me, I didn't notice a lag at all. As soon as I stopped eating all that stuff, like I just felt amazing, like just right there. I just got better and better and better. But some people can take up to 3 weeks, and so they give it like 42 days. So they give 6 weeks for these people, just to make sure that they were fat adapted. And they found that they had the same exercise ability and potential, and they could really push themselves really hard. And then they switched them. So the guys that were doing keto started eating carbs, and the guys that were eating carbs did keto. And again, give them 42 days, and found that they were still able to exert themselves exactly the same, except with the added bonus that the guys who were in keto, fat adapted, could just keep going. They wouldn't run out of their glycogen. So, but that is one thing that you can have other things trip you up besides just the insulin. So that is something that I certainly do see sometimes when people go from keto to carnivore. They get, especially in their if they're a high level athlete, they get even more results. And I think it's probably a lot to, there are a lot of things going on, I think, but I think one of the major ones is probably to do with the insulinogenic response to the lectins.
Did you start any of this process while you were playing rugby, or has it all been post-career, or?
Yeah, no, I did this for, like, when I started this 23 years ago, I was just in college, university, and I took cancer biology and just learned how toxic plants were, and that there were like just dozens, if not over 100 carcinogens in just all the different plants and fruits that we ate. And they were 10,000 times more abundant than the pesticides we sprayed on them, and 500 times more likely to cause cancer than the pesticides we sprayed on them. So we were just blown away by that. My professor just told us that he didn't eat any plants. He didn't eat any vegetables, any salads. He wouldn't let his kids eat salads. And he said to us, he's like, plants are trying to kill you. And so I was just like, yep, never eating plants again. So I was 20 at the time, and I was playing for a university team. I was playing at senior level, and I was, in the mix for the U.S. national team. And I just stopped eating all plants. And so I defaulted into just eating meat, because what else is there? And so I was going around the grocery store going like, well, what the hell can I eat? And I just came across some eggs and meat, so I just picked those up and just started eating that. And my athletic performance just absolutely took off. Absolutely, it was just night and day. I mean, I was putting in a lot of work, and I was very serious about it at the time. But at the same time, my fitness was just increasing at levels that it had just never ever done before. And I got to the point where I was so fit that I could just sprint all day and not get tired. I was at a dead sprint all day, every day, throughout every practice, every drill, every game. And I couldn't get tired. I couldn't wear myself out. I got in such good shape that, like, after a game, I play like a high level game in like the Canadian Premiership, and I'd just be buzzing. I played open side flanker, which, a lot of running, a lot of contact. And I remember like walking off the pitch one day, and I was just like buzzing. I'm like, what am I doing? I'm like that wasn't even a workout. Like, I've got to go run. I've got to do something. And I was like, this, because normally you were just sprinting for just 8 hours a day, and like, it's only 90 minutes. That's not enough. I was like trying to see like where in the day I could just go and just sprint 10 miles real quick, just to run this out of my system before like we had the post-match function and everything. And at that exact moment, like, one of the guys on the team, who's one of the fitter guys on the team, just said, oh my God, like, if that ref blew the whistle, like 5 minutes later, I probably would have, died of a heart attack. I was just so drained. And it was like, that wasn't even a workout to me. And, some of the other fit guys on the team they were gassed, they were dead. So, that's when I really started noticing like how much of a difference this was making. And, but yeah, it was night and day. And then when I was in England, as I mentioned before we started playing over there, that's when I actually slipped off. I was about 25, and some of the meat was breaded, had some sort of crumbing on it. And I was just like, well, it's a plant, but dose makes the poison. Maybe it's not all that bad. And I sort of convinced myself that maybe it wasn't all that bad. And within a few months, I remember thinking a few weeks, few months, I remember thinking, I was like, I was just getting these aches and pains and, my back hurt. And it was just all these weird little things going on that had never happened in the last 5 years. And I just didn't feel as just superhuman amazing as I normally did. I was still playing well. I still felt good, but I was like, why don't I feel as just unbelievable as I normally do? I mean, I'm not working as hard. I'm not pushing myself. Like, at 25 now, I'm just over the hump and I'm just dying now. My body's just breaking down. And, but that was when it started, just a little bit, just crumbed chicken. Like, that was enough. Everything else was meat. But the biggest thing that did was that was the crack in the dam, because now I was out of the mindset of just, I'm not eating any plants at all ever, to, oh, well, why don't I eat that? Or why don't I put some ketchup on something? Why don't I do this? And I remember thinking to myself, I haven't used ketchup in years. Like, what? Why haven't I? Oh, I guess I'll use some. It was weird. It was just this surreal sort of moment. And then it just sort of slipped off. And then I started just eating more of a whole food approach, still very heavily meat based, but other things would be in the mix as well. And, like salads or something like that. But it was always whole foods,
It's exactly the sort of cycle I go through quite frequently, to be honest. Like, and it's usually not even, same as what you're saying. It's not deliberate, but quite often it comes. I got 2 little kids.
Mm-hmm.
It comes just from practicality of time. You go, oh, I'll just have what the kids are having tonight. And it's exactly like you said, you do it once, you're like, oh, I'll do it tomorrow. And then all of a sudden I have a rush of motivation and I go a few weeks going really well again and then slip back. So I know it's exactly what I go through.
Yeah. Well, I do know, now that, like, in my late 20s, when I was still playing, at a high level in the US Super League and then in Ireland in the AIL one, and I'm not sort of doing this. I still felt good and I was still able to compete, but I had other, when I was in Ireland, I obviously had other commitments and things like that, time commitments with medical school, but I felt better at 38 when I rediscovered carnivore than I did at 27 playing, top level rugby in the US and training a lot. And, that was within a couple of weeks. And I was out of shape. I'd just been doing humanitarian work. I'd been in Bangladesh in the refugee camps there. And so I'd been there for a while and I had not been working out and just been eating whatever the hell was available in a refugee camp, just not always anything that you even recognize, but you just eat what's there. And then, I was out of shape. I was way overweight. And 2 weeks into it, I lost 10 kilos in like 10 days, really. And then I just started feeling amazing. I'm like, right, I'm going back and playing some rugby. And so 38 went back out, and my team in Seattle had just turned professional. The Major League Rugby Championship just started that year. And so I was out there playing with those guys who, some of these guys were professionals from overseas and others were, high level US players. But they'd been training for months and I hadn't been, but I was able to keep up and I was able to just be at a dead sprint the whole time, even though I was very out of shape. And like a few weeks into that, we had a fitness test and like a modified bleep test. If people know what that is, it's miserable. Yep. And
I've done that.
I finished like top 5, out of like, 90 players, and that's like three squads. But that's being, that was really just like 2 weeks of running. And I was able to just be that competitive purely off of my diet. And I was 38, so it makes a massive difference, at least for me and from what I've seen, and conceptually from the biochemistry of it, it does make sense to me that why that would.
So it sounds like you noticed the biggest difference performance-wise in your running. Did you notice any difference, like gym work, power work, when you initially started? Was it improvement? Was there like a backwards bit for the start and then it picked up?
Yeah. For me, no, I didn't get any backwards bit. I just started improving right away. Some people do notice a dip, but that usually comes back in like a couple weeks. As I was saying with Prof Noakes, he was saying like at most 3 weeks you'll get fully keto adapted. But I felt better right away, and that was one of the first things I noticed, that there was something different. There was something sort of amazing going on, was because I couldn't get sore. I wasn't sore after like these big gym sessions, and I had just like bought a bunch of like home equipment because I was helping my folks with some health issues, so I was taking some time off from work. And so I had 2-3 hours a day, 4 hours a day to just work out. And so I was just doing a bunch of lifts, and I did like a heavy leg session with like 12 big heavy leg exercises to failure. And normally that would leave me very sore for quite some time, especially because I'd really just gotten back from Bangladesh. And so that was like the first leg day that I'd had in months and months and months. And I was expecting to be just miserable and sore and broken for a week or so. I wasn't even sore the next day. I mean, at all. And I thought, oh, that's weird. Like, well, I wasn't like jelly leg, just walking out like a, newborn deer or something like that, out of the gym. So like, well, maybe I just didn't push myself hard enough, maybe. But I went to failure every single set. And so I was like, well, I'll just keep going until I just really wear myself out. And I ended up doing those 12 sets again, the same workout set. And then I just started doing squats on top of that. And I ended up, I said to myself, okay, I'll just do sets until I just wear myself out. I just can't do anymore. And then I'll know, what's going on. And I ended up doing another 20 sets of squats to failure, every single one. And like the first set of that, my 13th set, I should say, I did 15 reps to failure. On my last set, I did, so my 32nd set, I did 12 or 13 was my failure. So it wasn't much of a dip. So, but I was giving myself a proper rest. I was giving myself like 3-4 minutes rest in between sets. So now what I do like the old Serge Nubret and, Garanda, and Jack LaLanne sort of thing, right? I only give myself like 60 seconds between leg sets and 30 seconds between upper body sets. A, it goes a lot quicker. And B, I can actually like wear myself out. But with that, I couldn't wear myself out. And the next day, I still wasn't sore. And I was like walking up the stairs. I'm like, how am I not feeling this? I was taking 2 at a time. And then I was like, okay, yeah, there's something going on in my hamstrings. And so I went hiking. I went up this horrible mountain. It's called Mount Si. It's a miserable hike. It's just straight up. But it was fine. I did it just fine. And but it was like 3 hours. And then I just felt so good after that. I was like, right, it's time to go play some rugby. And so I went to practice that night, and it was just at a dead sprint, and just felt great. And the next day, I could feel that, that I'd put in a lot of work on my legs, but they were not sore. They didn't hurt. I could go up and down the stairs. There's no problems. And, so I felt fine. Then the second day, normally you're worse on the second day. It's fine then too. I met a friend for coffee that day. And I was thinking to myself, okay, well, what about coffee? Can I have coffee? Is that safe? I had 1 cup of black coffee, and within 20 minutes, I felt my hamstrings tighten up. My back started getting stiff. I could start feeling this pain like forming as I was sitting there. I'm going, oh, okay, what's happening? What's happening? You could feel it in real time. I was sore for 2 days after that, just from 1 cup of coffee.
And sounds like you're so sensitive. Do you think you're overly sensitive to the plants compared to the average person? Like, because even when I did 6 to 9 months of carnivore, if I slip back, while I might not maybe feel a little bit off, I would never have a reaction like that to the coffee, say. Like, do you reckon there's part of your makeup that has made you so sensitive to the downside, but also so sensitive to the positive side of it as well?
I mean, maybe, everyone is going to be a bit more sensitive or less sensitive. I don't have too many like sensitivities like someone with autoimmune issues do. I think with that one, really what it was I just did an obscene workout. And I should have been just crippled for months. Whereas like now, on the rare occasions that I have like a cup of coffee or something like that, which is really, I don't think I've had coffee in years, but I've had a cup of coffee here and there since then. And maybe we're working out or whatever, and maybe it's just like you just feel a bit, it's a bit, but it's nothing to speak of really. And and even like the soreness in my legs and my back at the time was not that bad. It was nothing close to what it should have been or what it would have been in years past. It was just I noticed it now, whereas before it did not exist. And so I could see that contrast. I'm like, that's that's doing something, but it wasn't. It didn't like debilitate me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But
it's just interesting though that you can pick up on that, whereas I don't reckon many people would pick up on those differences. But you're obviously I don't know, you've studied a lot of this stuff, but you can detail what one thing does to your body versus another very clearly, obviously.
Well, I was definitely looking for it too.
Yeah.
For the last few days, I was really focused on like, okay, am I sore? Can I get sore? Why am I not sore? And so, then I started noticing that, and I didn't know what was going on at first. I was like, oh, why is my back a little stiff? Like, that's weird. Oh, my hammies are a bit tight. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, that's what happened. And so then it was very noticeable. And then, and most people aren't going to maybe even notice it that much. I mean, I talk to some people, they say like, well, I'm doing carnivore and I feel great. My lifts are better. My exercises, everything's getting better, but I'm still a bit sore in the gym. And, talk to them, and, sometimes they're still drinking coffee, and that does seem to be a theme, but they're going to be way less sore than they normally would be. Someone like yourself who's doing really high level stuff, I think you probably would notice a bit of soreness, but probably not even all that much either, compared to, when you're eating like a more standard diet. You're going to have, and certainly not being in ketosis, because just being in ketosis, the higher ketone levels actually suppress inflammation as well. And so you're going to be removing things that cause inflammation. You're also going to be gaining something that reduces what's left,
Yeah.
So, but it's not all that much. But it's I did notice it anyway. And that's another sort of reinforcement for me of like, okay, I just, coffee's not worth it. I was never a big coffee drinker anyway, but that was enough for me to just be like, don't bother with it.
Yeah. Tom, have you, with sort of your recovery, have you noticed a difference when you're being strict carnivore or very low carb versus when you're sort of slipping off?
Look, I'd say when I was very strict carnivore, especially in those off-season sessions, a bit like what you were saying, Anthony, about being able to back up session to session.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'd run every second day. Like we normally run every second day in the off-season, but I was finding that easier than normal.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of recovery after games, because the recovery after a game is usually not necessarily about the running or the speed, it's usually the contact. Like, okay, I've been sore all this week because I had a 120 kilo guy drive his knee into my spine, and that really hurts. And so that's still sore now, but the rest of my body's recovered pretty well. But you generally guaranteed to have a couple of hits like that from the game. You're sore for 3 to 4 days post. Tomorrow we train. I should feel pretty good tomorrow, and then we play 3 days later. So you're always feeling good to the game, unless you have a particular injury. But I'd say I did notice a bit of a recovery difference when I was really, really strong carnivore. But kind of like what Anthony was saying, I haven't noticed a huge negative impact when I've added little bits of carbohydrates in. And I'm not a big plant eater either, so I don't know if plants have as much of an impact on me. But just by having rice back in, I haven't noticed the downsides that a lot of people might if they're super sensitive to insulin or whatever it may be. It might be a small percentage difference, but for me, as I was saying before, by reducing the cramping impact, it was kind of a bit of a deal I've been willing to make. Now, I probably could be a bit more disciplined, especially in the off-season and pre-season. We're not worried about games and cramping, and that's where I think I should be back to being more strictly carnivore. I think that's the process I'll go this off-season again. But, to sort of – I do notice a difference, but not as stark as what you've described, Anthony.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the thing is too is that you can still run on carbs. You just have to keep feeding carbs.
Yes.
And because you run out of the glycogen, but if you keep eating more, this is why like cyclists, they use that sort of sugar gel sort of stuff to like refeed, and you can do that. But if you don't eat the carbs at all, then you never have to. And so there are advantages to that. But you can certainly do it. I mean, most high-level athletes in the world right now and recent decades have all been doing it that way. So I'm not saying that you can't do it like that. And so you clearly are. It's just I think there is a bit more of an advantage. But I think that a big part of it is just eating a lot more meat, which is what your body wants, and the fat as well. And and if because it's not, like you say, like it's not something that you really want to mess with in the middle of the season, especially like if you're prone to getting those cramps and things like that. Like, is that worth it? Going into like later on in the season, like, just throwing that out there and then potentially getting cramps that's probably not a great idea. But, you can definitely keep doing it, by eating carbs, and you just might have to eat more carbs on the day of the game.
Yeah.
But there are other advantages as well. But, it's good that, you're not seeing too much of a hit. And I think there's a huge benefit in cutting out a lot of the other sort of plants and just keeping it sort of clean carbs. and just eating a lot more meat. I think that's huge. Have you noticed? Well, I should say this. When you were doing just carnivore, did you notice a difference in your weight as well, like, or your weightlifting as well? Because like for me, like I was saying, like I can just basically my recovery is so quick that I can just do 20 sets of something, without real much problem. Then I'm feeling pretty good the next day. Did you notice a similar experience?
Well, not in terms of that, because our gym program sort of set. Like I don't go into the gym and go, I'm just going to do 20 sets of bench today or 20 sets of squats. Like we'd have our 4 sets of trap bar deadlift and our Nordic curls or whatever it may be. So I wasn't there experimenting. I'm sort of, it's a different scenario. Like you probably got a bit more freedom to play around with it. So I didn't notice much there, but I lost a lot of weight. Like we do the DEXA body scans. Have you ever had them? Like the proper bone density ones. And I lost 6 kilos, I think, but I gained 2 kilos of muscle. So I actually lost 8 kilos of fat, really, to be able to lose that amount over that sort of 6 to 9 months, which the dietitians had always told us, like, it's impossible to lose significant weight without losing muscle. But I did that. But my weight, like the gym numbers that I was lifting and stuff, probably similar, but I was doing them while weighing 6 kilos less. So my power to weight ratio was way up from where it was before, which is really all we care about. Like footy's not quite as physically, like it's not as much about strength as rugby is. It's more closer. It's in between there and soccer. Like our running demands are very similar to soccer. If soccer went for another 30 minutes, like we're an extra quarter on soccer's timeline. So we're more worried about, repeatability of sprints and short, sharp movements than we are about huge rugby tackles and scrums. Like that's a rarity. So yeah, I wasn't as concerned about the gym stuff, but I was obviously rapt to lose 6 kilos and be running better and feeling better on the field, especially.
Yeah. I was going to say too, when you mentioned the hex bar deadlift, that's something I think it was Flaherty. There's a guy. He's a professional trainer in the U.S., but he like swears by the hex bar deadlift. I think that's one of the best to get that strength to weight ratio up, especially like concentric. So the concentric hex bar, so you just lift it up and then you just drop it and you just do that, and then you don't have the eccentric where you're sort of tearing apart the muscles and you grow and you hypertrophy. So you're just getting the strength, but you're not getting the bulk. And so he was, he's saying that he can drop people. That he was actually saying that he could predict people's 40-meter dash time down to like the 10th of it, like 100th of a second, based on what they can do with the hex bar deadlift. And he did that with like 100 people, 100 different like NFL athletes or prospects or whatever. And they all did their hex bar thing. And he just set out, where they were going to place out of 100. And he got all of them except 2 in the exact order. And it was really interesting.
Well, that's sort of that's the main part of our workouts during the week. So we'll do a power day where we'll do jumps with the trap bar. So it'll be literally 3 counter movement jumps, 4 sets of 3, but it's attached to a gym aware program, which has a little tiny cord, which measures your velocity. And funny you say that about the NFL, because our weights guy brought that from the NFL, and he said the scores on that are like our measure of power. So he's like, the quicker you can move a 50-kilo trap bar on a jump correlates to how good your power is on the field. And we're all, like, a lot of our guys, bar 1 or 2, are a fair way off NFL athletes, like the receivers and running backs, much more endurance based over here. But he's like, our biggest thing is we want you shifting that bar as quick as possible. And then on the Wednesday will be a heavy trap bar day where it'll be, 4 sets of 3, 4 sets of 4, max weight. Usually we will do the eccentric, like lowering as well. But the Monday power day is all about how quickly can you jump off the floor and not even land and reset, but down, up, down, up, down, up. So yeah, they've become the biggest part of our weights training is the trap bar. And you remove a lot of the risk with a normal traditional deadlift of any back injuries. You got a lot of guys, like we have 45 guys in the gym and maybe only 3 to 5 different coaches. It's hard to watch everyone's technique perfectly. So to remove a lot of the injury risk, trap bar is a lot safer.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that was the thing too with the concentric, because you're not sort of breaking down the muscle more. You can do it more often too. So that's, I don't know if you want to sort of go off program and add more things in, but if you were going to, that might be one to think about. I know a lot of rugby guys that like Carlin Isles, he's like the speedster for the US sevens team. And he was like a prospective Olympic sprinter, and then he switched over to rugby because it wasn't.
I reckon I've
gonna
seen YouTube videos of him.
Yeah, he just runs
It's like,
around
dude,
people.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. So he does that. He does that training program. So he does the concentric, and that was something he was saying too. So if you do, sort of a few sets, sort of like 4 or 5 sets, or maybe was it 3 sets of like 5 to 8 reps of just the concentric lift right before you go and perform, like do a 40 or play a game, that you'll actually be faster because you'll load up your muscles and get them ready to fire much more.
So we'll do that tomorrow morning. We'll have a primer session before our main training session, which is tomorrow, and then they have the option of guys to do it in the rooms before a game. So they'll have we can't get the gym stuff in there, but we can get med balls and do med ball throws and med ball axel throws and stuff like that. So that sort of stuff's really made its way into AFL the last probably 2 to 3 years. A lot of the NFL stuff, I think most of it's coming from the NFL, where all the money is, and all the research and that sort of stuff is coming into our sport as well. So yeah, we would never have done that previously, doing primer weights before training.
Nice. Oh, very good. Yeah,
that's awesome. Last time we spoke, Tom, you guys were getting into a bit of the knees over toes stuff, like particularly Nordic curls. Is that still on the recipe? Or
Nordics are massive. Like, that's our biggest predictor of hamstring injuries. So you have to have a score of over 400 as a minimum to sort of be considered semi-safe from a hamstring injury.
400. What does that mean?
So it's a computer score off the Nord. So there's a machine called the Nord board. So it essentially holds your ankles in like you would do a Nordic curl, but it tells how much force you're putting through the handles with your hamstrings. So, and then we also do fascicle length testing of our hamstrings. So there's a quadrant, and if your score's over 400 and your fascicle length is a certain length, you're in the top quadrant. You're considered safest from hamstring injuries. If you've got short fascicles with low strength, you're in the most risk category. So guys who's whatever you're in, you'll be given a program based on, we need you to work on stretching your fascicle length out, or we need you to just work on the strength, and you'll be doing weighted Nordics, more reps, whatever it may be. We do a lot of Copenhagen's, which are like the groin. It's sort of like a Nordic for your groin. So you have one leg up laying on your side off a bench or something, and you have to lift the rest of your body weight up using your groins. A lot of our stuff, other than the power exercise we do in the gym, are based on groin, hamstring, back sort of injury prevention, like core stability. We have a lot of guys that get like the old school, not the old school OP, but groin issues from just because there's a lot of running, a lot of change of direction in a week. So a lot of our program is around preventing those sort of injuries.
Yeah, nice. Do they have you guys on a diet program as well, or is everyone just sort of left to their own devices there?
Yeah, we have a nutritionist. She's actually really good. Like, I've talked to her about my, having been on a high protein when I've done carnivore before, and, being in a much higher protein than what she would probably normally recommend. But I've had some terrible nutritionists in the past, which is like you're talking to a Year 9 textbook, and you have some that are really flexible and go, no, I'm more than happy for you to do this. If you're seeing benefit, I'm happy to support you on it. It's still in the general sense of education. It's a lot more just like you were talking about, like a whole foods diet, which look, still a million times better than what kids would eat in year 10, 11 when they're playing footy, where they're, it's Macca's on the way home and it's, whatever you can get your hands on in the cupboard. It's still a big improvement on that, but it's not anywhere near a low carb sort of diet or anything like that.
Yeah, I think, a lot of those are still in that. Yeah, I guess better in the sense of whole foods and everything like that, but still very carb centric. They're still doing that with rugby as well. I've been trying to talk to some of my friends the guys I played with are now sort of running the Seattle team now, and I'm trying to sort of like just quietly just be like, oh, there's this thing, if I could help you with it, like they're still, they've got their guy, and they've just, it's the same traditional sort of thing, just like get your macros here, sort of lean sort of meats and lean proteins, and then, get all your energy from carbs and things like that. So it's not, they're not quite there yet, unfortunately.
The problem is you've got to be a very brave or very senior sort of nutritionist to go and be the first to do something in a professional sport. And like, footy here is the biggest sport by far. If it doesn't work, or just say you had a big injury list that year by chance, or you didn't perform well, the finger is going to be pointed at the person who did something different for the first time. So no one really wants to take the risk. So I get that. And we actually, when I did start doing more of the low carb keto 8 years ago, a lot of guys had a really good go at it. Like we would have had 10 to 15, and a lot of guys still keep those principles. They're not maybe as invested anymore, but it was as close as we got to getting a whole team buy into it.
Nice.
And we did see some good results, at least physically. Performance wise, we didn't really translate on the field. Not really for that reason. We probably just weren't there as a team yet, but that was as close as we got to getting a whole team on board. And it was because we had Tim Noakes come and present, and we had a doctor who was pushing it.
Yeah, very good. Well, it's really cool that you guys had him come out and talk to the team like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's huge. I mean, he's been one of the top top doctors in internationally for exercise physiology for decades.
Yeah.
And he was one of those guys that was a proponent of carbohydrates. And you need carbohydrates for this sort of thing. And I think whatever 10 years ago or so, he just sort of went like, damn it, I was wrong. I'm so sorry. I've been lying to you people. Like this is totally different. Now he's doing all his research down the other track. So yeah, that's lucky to get him because a lot of people outside of like these circles that sort of we're in, like wouldn't have really come across him and come across his work, especially the transition, because he got vilified because he just had a change of heart and just said, hey, look, this is where the evidence is taking me, which I think is a very responsible thing to do, especially as a professor who's made his career off of saying one thing and now he's saying, I got it wrong, guys. This is something different now. They took him to court. They tried to take his license away. I mean, it's just ridiculous what people will go through to protect their ideologies.
Yeah. What did you think? Like, obviously, you've got your thoughts on all the plant stuff and then carbs as well. But would you say plants versus say seed oils? Where are you sitting on like the seed oil sort of debate? I've seen a lot more of that on social media that people are pointing the finger at even that more so than carbs now, that your refined vegetable oils are like maybe your carbs are fine, but all the oils and stuff they're coming with are actually the thing to blame. Like, where do you sit on that?
Yeah, I think those are terrible. I mean, just the industrial process that they go through is pretty wretched. It makes them turn rancid anytime the oil's outside of the seed or the plant in general. Any liquid oil, if it's liquid at room temperature, is much more unstable. And it breaks down into these very inflammatory byproducts. Also have a massive omega-6 ratio to make it something that don't even have really any omega-3s to speak of. And so the omega-6s, you need omega-6. It is necessary. It's an essential fatty acid, but you need it in a specific proportion to your omega-3s. And it's the same enzymes that metabolize omega-6s as omega-3s. And so you can drown out the enzymes with your omega-6s. So even if you do get some omega-3s, they don't even get used. They don't even get picked up because there's so many. Just they get overwhelmed. And also when you're heating these things, they have to heat these things at high temperature to just make them. And when you heat anything, every 10 degrees Celsius that you raise up the temperature, it doubles the reaction rate. So it speeds up the degradation into these rancid oils that are quite harmful. And so just by the process of making this stuff, they've completely turned all of these things rancid because they heat it up to such high heat that it just massively increases the reaction rate by millions of times. So it's already rancid. Then they have to dump in all these crazy industrial chemicals that are known carcinogens to humans to try and wash out some of this junk. And I mean, when they were first doing this stuff, it was with canola oil was made from like rapeseed oil, which was an industrial lubricant. That's where it first used it as. And they're like, oh, well, this is a fat. Maybe we have tons of this stuff. Maybe we can just sell this to people. And so they started marketing it, but like it was so toxic that like it was actually just not, it was not edible. It was not palatable. It was just poison. And so it was illegal for them to use that. And so they had to sort of breed, I think they bred sort of other seeds that were just slightly less toxic, but like they still had this toxin. They just had it at a lower level that like passed under the bar. They're like, all right, yeah, there we go. So it's already a toxic seed, is already a toxic oil. Plants have defense chemicals. That's a fact. Seeds are a plant's baby. That's usually where, they have the highest concentration of toxins because they're trying to protect it more than anything. And so that's normally what you see. You see this high concentration of toxins in there. And so, now you're getting oil just straight from that. You're not going to just get rid of all these things. Some of that stuff's going to come with it, and so, yeah, I think that stuff is is not good. I think a lot of the in research that shows that there's not really much of a problem with it, or maybe even like a benefit from canola oil to something else. Some of these things are really poorly designed studies. A lot of them are industry funded research, and the one thing you can count on with industry funded research is it will support the industry.
Yeah.
Because if it doesn't, they just don't publish it. Simple as that. And a lot of these things are designed in such a way that the outcomes, the endpoints are going to be something favorable. And sometimes they'll run an experiment to a certain endpoint, and that endpoint's unfavorable, but they look back here and they say, well, we can actually say that this is the favorable endpoint. So we'll say that's the endpoint. And so, there's a lot of these little tricks that you do to make something look better than it is or worse than it is. And there's a lot of that with seed oils. But I mean, either way, whether or not this is good for you or bad for you or neutral, it certainly wasn't something that we ever existed on before the 1950s, because it didn't exist before then. And you can't say that something's essential and that you need it if we didn't even have it 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, 500,000 years ago, when we were evolving. If it's not something that we were eating 50,000 years ago, it's not something that we have to have. Right? By definition, if it's not even something that existed 50,000 years ago, why do we need it? Of course, we don't need it. And if you look at this is epidemiology, but if you look at the rates of heart disease and you look at the levels of seed oil consumption, they perfectly track each other. And seed oil, precedes the heart disease rise by 15 years or something like that. So it's like you have these two lines just going up. And same with like sugar and high fructose corn syrup, they just track like that. Whereas the animal fat, saturated fat, it's actually the opposite. So it's going down as heart disease is going up, and so it's an inverse relationship between heart disease.
Yeah, that's the part that's like, it seems, it almost like, I feel like in another 10 years time, it'll be what we all point to, in even more so than maybe processed carbs, that will go, that was the worst part, rather than even sugar. Like, obviously sugar's been around for a long time, honey and natural sort of sugars, but I feel like the tide's sort of turning a little bit even on that now, that people are realizing that your vegetable oils are not very good. And I think it'll still take a long time, but that's the one thing I've seen the most of recently, is a lot of the data coming out on how bad the seed oils are. And I've always tried to cook in butter, or just, you can buy beef fat here in the supermarket. I just try to buy tallow anyway. But
well, that's good too. And that's the best one as well. And even I don't think most people are going to understand that trans fats are bad. And trans fats come from these vegetable oils. They're partially hydrogenated seed oils. That so when you have a double bond, right, it just changes the shape of the molecule, and the molecules chain can come down here and then branch off and then come off here, or it can go down there. And so this is cis, it comes off the same side. This is trans, it comes off the opposite side after that double bond. And that trans connection doesn't exist anywhere in nature. So our bodies have no idea what the hell to do with that. And so that's where you see like these massive, just, buildup of plaques and disease and things like that, is when there's just all this trans fat crap. So that's actually been made illegal in the US now. You can't cook with that stuff. You can't use it in anything. And I think other places have made it illegal as well. And that comes from all those seed oils as well. And that's certainly, I mean, there's no question about that stuff is toxic. And you mentioned sugar as well. Yeah, we have had sugar for a long time, but we haven't had the exposure to it that we have now.
Not the quantity.
Yeah, exactly. So like in the late 1800s, I think like 1890s, the average American ate about 4 pounds of sugar a year, whereas now it's 150 pounds a year. Right? So it's just insane difference. And that's going to make a difference, of course. And maybe people were certainly eating honey and fruit before, but it was seasonal. We didn't have refrigeration. We didn't have jetliners to bring things over in cold storage over from other continents, from the tropics and things like that, and greenhouses and all these sorts of technology related food development and transport and things like that. So it was, it was much more difficult to actually, it was a treat, maybe you had some, even like in, you see it's like some cowboy movies and there's just like, oh, there's hard candy down in the general store, it was like, they'd have that like, every now and then it'd be like a little treat, but you really wouldn't even have access to that. So yeah, I think it's definitely the amount that we're being exposed to now has made a huge difference.
Oh, absolutely. Look, you've just explained it there, that probably all of this can be explained by evolution in some way, and that the way we're doing it now isn't really the way it was meant to be done. So yeah, it's funny that even like you're just talking about the inverse relationships between saturated fat versus fructose corn syrup and stuff like that, going upwards and downwards, and why are we so backwards with our nutritionists that they think it's the other way around is just baffling. Like you could just look at those two graphs and that would be enough to explain to you what's gone wrong in the last 70 years. But
yeah,
like those two graphs alone should be all you need to see to make like a general decision on what you eat.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem to click.
I might like get those things, like frame them and just put them up behind me for like every talk I do.
You will still get people say to you, "Oh, we just weren't detecting them." I had a conversation with a friend on Monday night, and he was like, "Oh yeah, but we didn't used to measure how many people were getting cancer or heart disease." I was like,
you could look at how many people were fat versus not fat in the 50s to now, and then go back to the 1900s.
Exactly. Right, and we actually did have records of that. People saying that we just didn't count. I mean, just have never actually looked at the Bureau of Statistics in the U.S. government. Like, it is insane how much stuff they kept records on. I looked at these things, specifically for heart disease and different, and just diseases in general. I mean, they had things going back to 1900, and they had things categorized by how many people had something, how many people died of it, in the country, in each state, in major cities in each state, by ethnicity, by gender. And I mean, I don't mean just like, just like baseline. I mean, like every damn ethnicity. I mean, Italian, Greek, French, black, white. It wasn't just black and white, I mean, it had so much detail. Like, people kept a lot of very, very careful records. And, you look back at these things. I mean, we literally threw away an entire century plus of very, very clear statistics and records and medical literature when we said fat causes heart disease, stop eating it. And they just threw it out. They just started looking at things completely fresh, and they just said, right, everything's just start over from scratch. This is the only thing we know, and now we're going to go from here. Talking about like Sally Norton's book on oxalates, just talking about plant poisons in general. She made this whole book called Toxic Superfoods, where she just talks about oxalates, and she goes back into the literature. And there are people from the late 1800s, early 1900s, mid 1900s, 60s, 70s, even the 90s, talking about how like these oxalates are a defense chemical that are toxic, and all the different things that they do, all the different ways that they can damage you, the different levels that they start, exerting toxicity. And even in the 1990s, people talking about like, hey, people thinking that, plants are good for you and they're just safe, and we're just living in the Garden of Eden. Something I've said before is like, these people are fooling themselves. Like, these things are toxic, and like, you can't eat too many of these things. People have died from eating too many oxalates. Oh gosh, why am I blanking on his name? What's his name? Australian.
Hemsworth. Yeah.
So he went like vegan for a while and was having these like big, spinach smoothies and things like that, and just having all this veggie stuff. After about 3 weeks of this stuff, he got checked into the hospital. He's sick as a dog, had like a bunch of kidney stones, had to get surgery. And it was just, he had these calcium oxalate stones in his kidneys from 3 weeks of this stuff. He's like, right, not doing that.
Has he gone back?
I think he's eating meat now. Yeah. And certainly not eating all the crazy oxalates, because spinach has just a ton of oxalates, sort of like sweet potatoes and things like that. And so you can have serious problems. It can cause neurotoxicity. It can cause actually like serious neurological problems. It is a poison, and it's used explicitly as a poison by the plants to stop you. You hear this there's so many weird arguments in the vegan community, and they sort of bounce from one's position to another because no position is tenable. And so the current one they're talking about now, we talked about this, eating ancestrally, eating to our biological nature. If we didn't evolve on it, then obviously, we don't need it. They're saying, well, actually, we probably, like, yes, the evidence shows that we were eating a lot of meat and maybe exclusively in some areas just eating meat, but that might not have been optimal. You're just trying to get to reproductive age. It's not necessarily what's good for longevity. Like, says who? According to what? Exactly. It's made up.
Simon Hill, very wise.
Yeah. So,
what about I'm playing devil's advocate here, but the argument on the other side can be small doses of plants almost can have the, a little bit of poison makes you stronger on the other side. What do you call that?
Hormesis.
Yeah. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, sure. Some things can have a hormetic benefit. Even arsenic in microdoses has been shown to have little benefits here and there, but very small doses, right? And these
what
plants,
sort of doses in a real life situation, like
but
a couple of stalks of broccoli, or
that's what I mean. That's a very good point, because they don't ever say that. They said that it's probably hormetic. Well, what's hormetic? There's 500 different toxic elements in broccoli, or I'm just throwing that out there, but there's dozens, if not hundreds, of things that can be potentially toxic in celery or spinach or cabbage or whatever. But they're probably hormetic. Okay, but you're not saying which one. Okay, what about the oxalates? So what level are oxalates hormetic? They don't say that. They don't say what's the cap on that. We know what the cap is. Cap is about 150 to 200 milligrams of oxalates. It starts becoming toxic. Before that, is it hormetic? Probably not. It's probably just not, your body's just probably able to clear it in time. It's not necessarily doing you any good. It's just that it's not building up to the extent of causing problem. But after 200 a day, that can actually start to build up and cause problems. Hemsworth was probably having like a couple thousand a day, and he got in trouble really quick. So they don't say that. They just say that was one of the positions that they jumped to, was just, they tried to deny for a long time that plants had any sort of defense chemicals, even though it's just a hard fact. Just go to a library and check out a book on botany. You'll figure it out pretty quick. Or all these guys that have been documenting all the different plant toxins and nightshades and oxalates and all these things going back hundreds of years. This is all in the literature, which they obviously don't pay attention to. And they just say, okay, well, yes, all right, we did a Google search. There's toxins there, but I bet you it's hormetic. And it's like, okay, but you had absolutely zero research, and you looked into that, not at all. Yeah. And so, but to make that claim, you have to say, which toxins are we talking about? At what level are they hormetic? What's the hormetic benefit? Where is the cap? When does it stop being hormetic? Because the idea of hormesis is that it at this range, it's good for you. At this range, maybe it's just whatever. And at this range, it's toxic, right? If it's hormetic. So what toxin are we talking about? What is its hormetic benefit? What is the level that you get that hormetic benefit? Where should people stop? Because that's important. If you're telling people to eat a bunch of plants, maybe exclusively plants, and you're admitting that there's some things that are toxic at a certain level, but maybe hormetic at a certain level, you need to identify, which toxins we're talking about, and how to know what the limit is and where to stop at that. But they don't do any of that. They don't provide any of those sorts of things. So yeah, maybe some of these things are hormetic, but like, we also know that a lot of these things cause damage and cause harm. And so, if you want to see, I think that's fully worthwhile doing, is identifying all these different toxins and finding what level sort of brings about sort of making a toxic level, like oxalates. We have a lot of information on oxalates and solanine and things like that. We do know there's certain doses that are going to start harming you, and other ones we don't have as much, ricin, 1 microgram per kilogram will kill you, so we know that one pretty well.
I've just finished Breaking Bad, so ricin's a topical one. Have you seen it?
I have, yeah. It was years ago though, but yeah.
Yeah, when he makes the ricin no, I won't spoil it if anyone hadn't watched it, but very deadly in one of the last episodes.
Yeah.
But no, like even what you're saying, it probably all makes sense again on what you were talking about before, that plants maybe were needed when there was a period in time when you couldn't have enough meat. Maybe, yeah, as you're saying, you could have a little bit here, a little bit there when needed to get through when there wasn't enough of another food, but they weren't available every day of the year, 365 days a year. So that theory probably makes sense. What's your thoughts on Saladino's sort of views on more of the animal-based versus more strictly carnivore, and his choice of what he chooses to eat and how he breaks it down.
Yeah, I mean, I still think that eating more meat is really good. I like how he supports that, and he talks about how, you know, like meat's what we're supposed to eat, and the fat's really good for you, and we should focus on that. I think that me personally, I don't think that we should be eating carbs really at all, and especially fructose. You know, I think that that's more harmful. You know, when you're eating it with fiber, you absorb less of it, which is a good reason, you know, why not to eat things with fiber, because fiber like delays absorption, stops you from actually absorbing and breaking down your food properly. But it also does that with fructose, and does that with some of the things you don't want as well. So you get less of the fructose from fruit if you're eating it with fiber, but you are going to absorb some of that, and you know that is going to work in your body the way that fructose otherwise works in your body. So fructose has been shown to be metabolized into the same byproducts as alcohol, right? So you get the same damage to your body from eating fructose and the breakdown products thereof as you do from alcohol and those breakdown products.
Is that in the liver exclusively, or
it gets through the whole body? Yeah. So you're not going to have, you know, you're not going to get drunk, right? But it is going to have an effect on your brain, because fructose gives a dopamine response to the addiction centers of your brain. So you can get like that sugar high. That's what that is. You're getting this dopamine hit. And so it can be very addictive, but it's also causing fatty liver disease, cirrhosis, type 2 diabetes, even heart disease, and implicated in what can feed cancers. And also it's been implicated in like neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, which is now being termed type 3 diabetes. So, you know, I don't think it's a good thing to have. Like if you're out in the woods and you're hungry and you need a quick hit of energy, you know, apples your best friend, you know, until you can, you know, take down a, you know, kangaroo or something like that, or a mastodon. I think that's probably, you know, a big survival advantage for us, that we had that available to us, and we could eat other plants as well to a certain extent to survive and then get our kill. You know, even the native Australians, they're known to eat different plants, but historically, if you look at the historical record of people living with them, talking to them, and studying them, they like exclusively ate meat unless they couldn't get meat, and then they knew which plants to eat, or they were using them medicinally for some reason or another. And so they just ate meat, and Native Americans as well. And then when you look at, you know, when you think about the ice ages, there's no plants to speak of during that time anyway, certainly no fruit and honey. So I think that you know, the fruit and honey side of things, I don't think you need it, because, you know, where was the fruit and honey when people were crossing over the land bridge from Asia to North America, you know, during the last ice age? I mean, there's nothing, right? So if you had to have it, you know, our ancestors wouldn't have made it. And all these different populations like the Inuit today, they wouldn't be there, right? Because there's none available to them, you know, when they're living traditionally. And so I don't think you need it. I think that fructose in and of itself is harmful, you know, in small amounts, whatever. Your body can deal with it pretty well. It can replenish your liver glycogen pretty quickly. Actually, it's one of the fastest carbohydrates to replenish your liver's glycogen. So if you're in a fix, you know, when you get a hit of fructose, bam, you've just got a full liver full of glycogen. Yeah, that's an advantage. But if you have access to meat and you're eating that, then you're going to replace and replenish your liver glycogen all the time. You don't need to do that, and you're going to sort of derail yourself by adding in that fructose. So I think it can actually be a disadvantage, certainly outside of that survival mechanism, and it's addictive, you know, so it gives that addictive signal to to your brain, and people want to do it. Any sort of time you start with a small amount of something addictive, you tend to eat a little more of it and a little more of it and a little more of it. And a lot of people that come to a carnivore diet or any sort of change in their diet, they're often doing it because they're trying to lose weight, they're trying to gain health. And a lot of these people have been struggling with food addiction, specifically carb and sugar addiction, and then you start sprinkling back in some of that addictive substance, and they can easily go off the rails. And I've spoken to a lot of people since Saladino started changing the way he ate and what he recommended, and they were like, oh, okay, well, I'll do that, I'll follow him, because he was the one who got them on it in the first place, and so they started incorporating a little bit of fruit, putting a little honey on things. And then it was just a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And then after 6 months, they're back eating, pizza and drinking sodas on the couch. And, just like I did, just with the breading on chicken when I was in England, that's how it started. And then I was putting ketchup on things. And then I was like, and then one morning I woke up and I'm like, oh, I haven't had French toast in years. Why have I not had French toast? And, well, let's make some French toast. Like just forgetting the last 5 years of my life when I'm just like, don't eat any plants, And for some reason, I just didn't know why I hadn't eaten French toast. And so I made some French toast and put syrup on it, And so, you can sort of get out of healthy habits pretty quickly on that. Now he's able to just stay with, fruit and honey and meat, and that's great. But I've spoken to a lot of people that degenerate very quickly because they have had these food addiction problems before. And the thing is too, is that, Dr. Saladino, for whatever reason, he's increasing the amount of sugar he's having as well. He's having, more and more and more of this stuff. And now he's putting like maple syrup in his milk and things like that. And that's what he feels gives him the best energy. But I think that's probably that, he's becoming dependent more on the carbs as opposed to being able to run on his own fat tissue.
And probably not ideal for someone who's trying to lose 40 kilos, whereas he's probably someone who can get away with those few extra calories.
And he's very active.
And he's very, like he surfs for 2 hours every morning, and so he's got a good life,
Yeah. And whereas most people who are coming to watch you or watch him, they're probably people looking for help. They're looking for a different way to try and lose weight. So it's probably not in the same situation.
Yeah. Or overcome diabetes or IBS or other sort of debilitating issues.
You're in just as bad a situation as you're probably all in one. If you're 40 kilos overweight, you probably got those other two as well.
Totally.
Yeah, usually. And and that's the thing, they say like, well, if you're metabolically healthy and you're metabolically fit and you don't have all these problems, that it's okay to eat carbs and sugar. That's like saying if you don't have lead poisoning, it's okay to drink water with lead in it. It's like, okay, but this is what gives you metabolic issues,
Yeah.
And so if you want to avoid that altogether, then maybe just steer clear of it. Like, you have a bit of it every now and then. You work out a lot. Are you going to develop diabetes? Probably not. But is it ideal? Is it the best thing you can do for your body? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I would argue against that. And again, just going back to that, what we evolved on, we did best just eating meat, and the fossil record is very clear. Our ancestors were big, tall, strong bastards with big, healthy bones. They didn't have joint degeneration. They didn't have cavities. They had fully developed jaws and teeth, and bigger brains. They had bigger brains than we have now. And, they were much taller. Like a lot of these guys that were hunting mastodons and other megafauna, they were on average 6'2" to 6'4" on average. Right. So a lot of these guys were like pushing 7 feet, a bunch of, AFL players, just running around with big, just taking down big game. And, the average height of a population, is indicative of the average health of the population. So like in the US now, the average adult male is like 5'8". It's pitiful, and so we should be much higher than that. We should be much taller than that. And we were. And so this idea that, we aren't optimized by eating what our ancestors eat, what we're biologically designed for. I mean, that's an oxymoron, saying that what we're biologically designed for is not our optimal food source. That makes no sense. But, to say that, well, we may not have been as healthy then, now just going vegan, just doing the exact opposite of what we've been doing for 3 million years, that's actually optimal. Even though we haven't been doing this for 3 million years, like based on what? Because based on the fossil record, we were much healthier then. We're much bigger then. We're much smarter then. We're much better developed then. And, so, they're not really offering any evidence to the contrary. They're just saying, what, I bet you, I bet you that you don't have to be, you don't have to eat the thing that you're biologically designed to be biologically, optimized, unlike any other animal on earth. Because any zookeeper will tell you, you feed an animal something it doesn't eat in the wild, it gets very sick, and it gets the same things we do. They say they get human diseases. They get obesity and heart disease and diabetes and cancer. And, we're getting human diseases. They're not catching it from us. But that's why you have that sign that says, do not feed the animals at the zoo. That's why. And then we think that, oh, actually, that doesn't apply to us, though, because, I bet you that, it's exactly the opposite for us, and absolutely no other animal on earth. But, I bet you it is for us. That's about as logically sound of an argument that they have.
Well said. All right, let's wrap there, lads. Tom, give carnivore another crack this preseason and let Dr. Chaffee and I know how you go.
No, you've inspired me. Even like, look, I'm not going to go back to 100% right now, as we was talking about middle of the season, but
can't do that. No.
even just what you're saying about, you know, the little things that make a day turn into a week, which turns into a month. Like, yeah, this has inspired me to go back to be a little bit better now, and then definitely in the off season. And
well, that'd be good, man. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't want you to sort of rock the boat too much when you're in season, but yeah, certainly like, you know, if you felt, you know, that you wanted to on the off season, that'd be great to see. And hopefully figure out, you know, and if you want, you know, if you're having issues with like the cramping or anything else, I mean, just feel free to reach out, and happy to try to troubleshoot things with you, because most of these things can be resolved, and then you can just really start running optimally. And just like, I think you would find that your athleticism and your performance will just really just go to another level, you know, by doing that.
Yeah. And the good thing is I'm not coming, like I'm 90% there. It's just sort of a little bit of a top to finish it off. So no, I appreciate it, guys. Thanks for having me on. It's good to have a chat and you know, learn a few different things. So no, I really appreciate it.
No, not a problem, man. Thank you very much for coming on. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Tom.